Welcome back to Let's Talk About Fatherlessness. I'm excited to have our guest today, Marquess Dennis. It's great to have you with us, man.
Hey, listen, it's truly an honor to be here, man. How are things?
Things are good. I mean, you and I have known each other for a few years now. We've met at the Fatherhood Commission, great events. We've gotten to know each other a little bit. We actually, this past December, I feel like we got to know each other a little more than we have in the past. But I just do. You just have, like, you come into a room, you got a big presence, man. You're just kind of there, and you're smiling, you're happy, and you're a positive, just a positive person to be around. And I love that about you. And so, and I'm excited to talk about all things fatherhood, fatherlessness with you. Just take a few minutes to tell us about Birthright Living Legacy and your organization and the different work you do with fatherhood in Oklahoma.
So, I am the founder and executive director of Birthright Living Legacy, which is a fatherhood celebration and support organization. And what we do is help validate the merit that fathers bring to parenting. And so we do that through summits. We also have biweekly fatherhood meetings. We do park crawls where we go from different parks all over the city and just bring dads and families out to be able to help them to intentionally engage with their kids and just be able to connect and be in community with other fathers.
That's so good. It's such a needed thing to get dads more engaged with their kids, and be more involved and even get reconnected. And so I really appreciate what you do. Now let's go back to just for a few minutes. Go back to why you got involved in this. Why are you so passionate about the issue of fatherhood?
So I'm passionate about it because I am one of the people that live the statistics. I was suspended. I was a teen pregnant. Um, I was, obese at times, but also in a situation where mental health was a problem for me. Addiction was a problem for me. Um, and then I became a father really young. Went to prison due to the school to prison pipeline and the statistics that show that when fathers are not involved in a child's life, the risks that take place. And then so the day I realized, like, wait a minute, I need to do something different. I tried to reach out at the time to figure out, excuse me, like what, if I want to be a better father, like where do I even go to do that? And at the time, nothing existed that particularly, met with my needs. And one of the things that a lot of people like to do is they're under this assumption that, oh man, that's great. You can have a deadbeat dad group. And I was like, well, lucky for you, I don't know that that exists outside of a court appointment.
Hmm.
But if we are going to actually change the culture of fathers being welcomed and seeing the purpose of them being in the home, then we have to educate this generation because this generation doesn't know what it is that even fathers bring to parenting, which is why with our program, we help validate that merit by sharing to the dads, like, hey, this is what your presence, your touch, and your voice does when you're around. But this is what it also does. And we explain that to mom because typically in parenting, moms are being taught that they are the yay or the nay. They are the say in what happens in parenting when really, they are just a portion. They're a very important portion, but so is fathers. Fathers are a very important portion. And when you tell mothers that they are the absolute, they tend to tell fathers, well, you can co-parent with me as long as you parent the way that I do. And as I always like to say, is that makes one of us unnecessary. And that is the narrative that has been taught is that you can parent if you parent my way. And then if you parent my way, then it's okay. But then it makes one of us unnecessary and it emasculates the man, which causes him to feel not needed, not worthy, not necessary. And then when you talk about fatherlessness, we don't ever talk about why that dad is not there. It's just always assumed that he was a deadbeat or he left because he was no good or, fill in the blank, when really there was not a space for him to exist. There was not an opportunity for him to come in and be his true self. There was not an opportunity for him to understand the thing that he's saying, that he's doing, that he's participating are adding value not only to that child, but to the relationship and helping the mother.
That's so good. Now going back to young little Marquise, how did What was your story like with your dad? What happened with that, if you don't mind sharing?
So, I mean, obviously, my dad wasn't around. And I was told my whole life, he didn't want to be around. He didn't exist. He just was a guy that, they got pregnant and, blase, blah, scrape. And so I didn't have my dad. So I walked around as a kid that has a fatherless, wound where I'm wondering, what about my personality is normal? What is it that I'm supposed to do? What is it I'm not supposed to do? Why do I feel this way? Why are these thoughts coming? And so I had to rely a lot on culture and the people around me, my environment, to influence me on what right and wrong was, or how I should be or shouldn't be. I wasn't able to be comfortable with who I was because I didn't know who that was. I only knew half of me. And then when I did bad things or when I got, my mom's nerves, she would say, "You just like your dad." Well, that sucks for me because now you're subliminally telling me to hate half of myself.
Hmm.
And so the verbiage around that was, you know, everything good comes from mom, everything bad comes from dad. And that's simply just not true. And so there's good and bad on both sides. And so all of that is necessary for me to be a productive, confident young person growing up. And so when I grew up, I didn't meet my dad until I was 13, albeit that he didn't have what I considered to be the skills of fathering. I thought it was going to be something like an after school special. We were going to bring out all these balls and start playing catch and, soccer and all these things. But in real life, what happened was is he still had to work. He still had a family he had to take care of. I was an additional version to his already family. And so until you understand the dynamic of what it's like to pay child support, to be in the system and all those kinds of things, you can't really understand what it means when you say, fathers don't want to be involved. But once you understand the pressure, the amount of money it costs, the constraints, the restraints, suspending of tags and licenses and things of that nature that you have to go through just to be able to see your child, you see how easy it is for a person to give up and say, you know what, if that's the way you want it, that's the way you'll have it. And so my job is to make sure that those dads are in cahoots with dads that are in the home. They're in cahoots with dads that were abandoned by their fathers, in cahoots with those that are supervised, but also around those that have taken a step up to say, you know what, I'm going to be the father to the fatherless at the moment. And I'm going to help try to nurture those relationships because when we bring those communities together, see, now we start to help educate each other. That exposure is what makes for a great community.
So, Marquise, whenever I, see you in public, and you're so put together, you look professional. I mean, even at the Fatherhood Commission, you're wearing a sport coat and things like that. What brought you from being the kid that went to prison and had all these struggles, teen pregnancy, all these things, to the professional guy that you are now? Because so many kids need to, and I had the same thing. I had people help me get to that point because so many of us that grow up fatherless, we don't know how to become a man. And so, how did that? Who helped you get to where you're at now?
Oh man, there was a myriad of fellas that came in and poured into me. I heard it best said that it doesn't matter who stands with you in the rain. It only matters who stands in the rain with you when they have the option to be dry.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of guys that were willing to help me understand. I mean, I learned some hard lessons in the streets. And then when I started to see how that stuff translated into the real world, I was able to grasp a hold. See, one thing that existed when I was a young man that doesn't exist now is when I was a kid that you could find groups of older men in diners or at restaurants where they're just kind of coffeeing and meeting up because that's just what they did. And even though they wouldn't talk to you, they would talk at you. And they would say things like, "Oh, these young people today." And that would let me know, oh, it's my turn to start listening. And so what I started to do was because I had the exposure of friends that had fathers and friends that had, the intact situation, I used to do this thing called spending the night. And so I would get tastes of understanding what that exposure was like, what those relationships were like. And so I started to reach up instead of reaching out, because I realized that everybody that was, on my level, they had the same problem I did. But when I started to reach up, and I seen these guys that didn't appreciate their own dads, that didn't appreciate their own stepfathers that were in there, or the coaches that they weren't listening to, I was like, man, this sounds like these older men I used to listen to. And I would just cling on, and I would try to help, carry their bags or just sit down and talk and ask questions and things like that. So over time, the development came from the older guys that, or the men that were pouring into me. Once they realized that I was actually listening, I didn't listen to everything, and nobody will. But the things that they were telling me, I was starting to utilize and put into play. It just really started to change for me. And there was one particular incident where I was working at Whirlpool Corporation. I was a 21-year-old man, wore jeans and a t-shirt, no big deal. Was in charge of this thing called the power team, which was training all the new people that came in. I'm 21, I don't know nothing. So this black man by the name of Roy Ogletree pulls me to the side one day. He's one of the top managers. I find Mr. Roy, and he was like, they called me over the intercom and say, Roy's looking for you. And I'm just like, oh, what's going on? So I go over there and I say, how you doing, sir? He's just drinking his coffee, not paying me any attention. And he leans over to me and says, why do you wear earrings? And I'm so offended. Like, what do you mean? Because they're cool. Obviously, you don't see what's going. So I'm like, I mean, because they look good. What do you mean? Like, I'm just so offended. Like, how dare you? And he, sipping his coffee, still not paying me any attention, leans back over and says, well, when you make your first million, tell me if you still want to wear them. And then walked off. And I mean to tell you, that crushed me. And so what ended up happening was I went home, this was when the internet was still kind of new, but I started to like look into it and research people, like professional black men that had earrings. The only thing that came up were sports and entertainment, and I was in neither. And so I realized, I took my earrings out that day, and I came to work the next day in a polo that I tucked in. And I kid you not, Sean, there was like 1,500 people that worked there. Every one of those people called me sir that day.
Wow.
When they spoke to me, they were like, yes, sir, no, sir. And I was like, all I changed was I took my earrings out and tucked in my shirt. And I seen that there was an actual difference. And so that's what solidified it for me. And that's when I changed the way that I dressed, and the professionalism that came about is because I learned that people actually do treat you different when you dress different.
Yeah. Wow, that's so good. And I think there's so many kids and teenagers and young adults that really could listen to that. Now what about God? How did you find God? How did God show up in your life? Was it at a young age, or when you were a teenager, or as an adult?
I mean, God's always been a part of my life. I mean, when you grow up in poverty, man, I mean, God is the only hope that most of you consensually can hold on to. There's crack dealers that still respect God. There's guys that are unfortunately beating their wives and molesting children and think that respect God. But God didn't become real to me until I got arrested. I was in the process of buying 3 keys of cocaine, in the waiting of 20 kilos of 20 kilos of methamphetamines that were supposed to come, and thousands of pills that I was supposed to have prescription delivered to me here in Tulsa. And when the FBI, the CIA, the ATF, the ICE, and all the other alphabet boys, the FBI, the U.S. Marshals, police, fire, all of them came looming down on me with helicopters and choppers and all the guns and AR-15s pointed at me. I remember looking up in the sky and I said, okay, God, I hear you. And
Yeah.
I haven't turned back since.
Wow. Wow. And then was there a time of when you got connected to a church, discipleship, stuff like that after all that happened, or?
No, I mean, so, when I was so like I said, God has always been in my life. I've been to youth groups and been to church, pretty much my entire life. My mom's she became an ordained minister after she was finished with her career in the streets. And so like I said, church has always been a part of it. It just was not real to me. until that moment. Because after that moment was when I had an opportunity to realize that I had to make a decision. And if I didn't make a decision to do what I needed to do, then nobody was going to do it for me. And so when I was inside, I realized, one, you can't become a devout Christian in prison. It's just not possible. Because unfortunately, the only thing that you can do while you're in prison is, you can visit when there's people that are coming from the outside, but they assume that you're a child molester or you're a snitch if you have all of a sudden decided to follow Christ once you come into jail. Because it's like you didn't follow rules all the way up until now. Why all of a sudden? And so there's a stigma for the guys that are in prison or in jail that are serving God, which I learned to be actually true. Because, like I said, criminals and drug dealers, they all had grandmothers and mothers that prayed for them and that were a part of their lives. So they respect church and they respect God. But they say, if you come out of there, just understand that the rules are different over here. So that's where you find those opportunities. So you can't really I've had some opportunities to have to do some things. Like we had a racist cop that was in the same prison that I was in, and he got brought in, and God told me I had to be friends with him. And
Mm.
not only was he a different race, but he was a racist cop, which was awful because it was my cross to bear, and I didn't want to bear it. But what ended up happening for him is he got the chance to ask me. He said, "Why are you so nice to me?" And so I told him, I said, this Bible tells me that regardless of what you've done in this lifetime or the next, my job is to show you the love of Christ. And that guy was able to give his life to God because of that moment. So seeing real life opportunities to where you have to actually carry your cross and it comes with consequence, it helps you to be able to solidify your walk. But when all you have to do is say a prayer and just keep going about your day, what difference does it make if your behavior changes? What difference does it make if your habits change? You see what I'm saying? You make God like a side chick. But when he becomes your everything, then there's some things that change. It's just like getting married. When I had a girlfriend, it was different. But when you're married, like those rules don't they change drastically from being married to someone versus just being in a relationship.
Yeah, that's so good. Now, how old were you when you finally just after you got out of prison, when you finally shifted completely, like, hey, I'm gonna follow God and I'm gonna do what's right now. How old were you at that point?
33 was when I got busted.
Wow. So
Yeah.
wow. Then how long were you in prison then?
For 48 months.
Okay. And then you came out, and then what was the story there? How did you what helped you get on the right path? I mean, I know you got out of prison, but what was the path?
I mean, it's a decision. Like, the thing is that people are under the impression that the enemy attacks people. That's not how he works. All he can do is give you an option. Just like if you go back to the garden, he can give you an option, but he can't touch you. He can't do anything to you. You know, he can just give you an option,
Yeah.
to give you a choice. The choice is what makes me, because I had to make a decision. Am I going to drop everything and follow God? Or am I going to continue with what I know? And there was opportunities that came, excuse me, where the Holy Spirit was really able to, manifest itself in real life and say, all right, what do you want to do? And I had
Yeah.
to really make a choice. It was when I was at my lowest point on the outside, trying to do the right thing, trying to stay pure, trying to stay holy, trying to live the right life, making $10 an hour, which is not enough to even pay for your gas. I'm working at a dead end job, or at least I thought. And I had the opportunity, because I was broke and busted and disgusted at the time. I lost all of my clothes because they got ate up in storage. Rats made a bed out of them. So I
Mhm.
had nothing when I came home. My family was all I had. And because I had marketable skills before I left, obviously I wasn't a jerk when I left. So I didn't have, I didn't have to like rebuild from zero. I still had my family. I still had the respect of my peers. I just had to change my circle. And so once I changed my circle, I came out, and like I said, there was opportunities for me to work, but there wasn't opportunities for me to get rich, so to speak. And so when I was approached with the opportunity to get back into the game, I was almost about to do it. And then God sent a man to me by the name of Richard. And Richard came and he said, "Hey man, aren't you that guy from I seen you at this church?" And I was like, "What? I only been to that place one time. There's no way you saw me there." And he was like, "No, you were the guy that the smile guy, right?" And so one of the pastors had, asked what the Christian emoji for joy was, and I smiled. And so she was like, "You, what's your name?" And I was like, "Mark." He was like, "Stand up and show everybody what a smile is." So I did like this weird Miss America wave. And so when I did that, he was there. And so he remembered me from that, told me that he wanted to hang out. And he was like, "Hey, man, we got this group of men that meet on Tuesdays. We have a discipleship, da 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 da." And I was like, "Yeah, whatever." And then I hear the Holy Spirit say, "You said you wanted new friends." I was
Oh,
like, "Really, bro? Like, not right now. Like, I don't got time for this right now." Because I had just ran into one of my old friends who had told me like whatever I needed. Just heard I came home, give me all the money I needed to get started back in my street business and go back. And I was just like, I was excited. I was like, this is a blessing in my head
yeah.
because I was so tired of being broke. Well, meet this guy Richard. Literally 10 minutes later, and so I was like, "Okay, well, let me get your number." He was like, "No, give me my phone. Here's your phone." And so he like was adamant. And so give him my number. And then so I jump back in the car, tell the young lady I was with, I was like, "Nope, let's go. I'm trying to, go back. I've made that firm decision. I'm going back."
Wow.
And so get in the car. As soon as I shut the door, boom, everything disappears. Holy Spirit pops up on the dashboard and said, "All right, you have your two options. You want to go with what you know, or you want to drop everything and follow me?" And I was like, "This is stupid. Why would you ask me this right now?" I'm just like upset. And so he was like, and so I was like, "This is a trick question. I mean, obviously, I got to drop everything and follow you." He's like, "Okay." And so I did. And when I did, man, when I tell you God showed up in my life and opportunity after opportunity, and that's how Birthright got to be in reality. This is something that I created in 2000 and probably 2003 in my head, and started doing the work in like 2011. In fact, like, with the money I was going to make from drugs, like I was so ignorant to the process of what, nonprofit work was and how it worked. I was going to use the money, the profits and proceeds to create this opportunity. And so, luckily for me, I got busted on that first transaction with the cartel members I was working with. And so that was what saved me, and that's why I said, "God, I hear you," because He saved me from making. I mean, if I would have done what I was going to do, I would have been liquid over $1 million cash after paying them back
Wow.
in just 30 days. Yeah, and so you can't go back to work after that. You know what I mean? Like, you can't go work a
Yeah.
normal job after that. Excuse me. And then, the amount of weight that I would have been caught with, I would have never seen the light of day.
Mm.
It would have been way too much. And so those are the things that I just am really grateful for. But because I'm trekking with God and following his voice and the things that he has me doing, it gives me opportunities like the Fatherhood Co-Mission, opportunities like talking to you, opportunities where I get to impact fathers, not always from a Christian perspective, but just as a man perspective. Because what God showed me was if you help men understand where their position and place is in life, at the head, at the top of the family and responsible, he said, let them know that they're seen, heard, and valuable, but also responsible. And then I'll take care of the rest. Because, just like anyone, as a CEO, as a believer, as a non believer, when you are in charge and it all comes crashing down, you all look up and go, "Lord, help me."
Yep.
And so that's what we're trying to do is make sure the men are in the proper position, because in the proper position, then God can do what he needs to do and help them find themselves on their knees with help.
Wow. That's so good. So just to fix the timeline a little bit, I just want to make sure you were You met this guy from the church. That was what year? 2003 or 2011?
No, I met the guy from the church in 2017.
2000 what? 17. 17. So you were at 2017. You were still kind of like, I'm not sure
I
if I want
got,
to go.
got
Okay.
I got out of prison August of 17.
Okay.
So I
And then
met him
at
like
that point, you took the birthright. Now, how did Birthright, when did it start up then?
so Birthright as an official organization started in 2020.
2020.
So we
Okay.
started organization in 2020.
So what happened between 2017 and 2020? How did God line things up for you there?
I mean, honestly, I was working at that job that I thought was just going to be a crap job. To be honest, I was making $10 an hour. The previous owner of the dry cleaning business that I was running, he had retired and sold his shares to the late wife of the gentleman that he was in partnership with. And so when he did, they were all super excited when I was coming back because I worked with them for a little bit while I was on pretrial while they were trying to figure everything out. I worked there and I increased business by 33%. So they were just like super excited when I was coming back. And so this lady, she doesn't know who I am. I'm just coming out of prison. She's like, "Who are you? And why is everybody so excited that you're here?" I was like, I don't know. I'm just a regular guy. And so she was like, "Well, what am I supposed to pay?" I said, "Whatever you want." I said, "Because then you'll see what I'm worth and you don't have to pay me that." And she was like, "I'm going to pay you $10 an hour." I said, "Okay." So, work did that for a couple of months. She ended up firing my buddy, who was my boss. He was the GM, tried to put people in charge, got placed it to where I ended up taking over as the general manager. They did a whole story on me on the news because of that. They were trying to use my story as a marketing ploy because the city wanted to do a thing called ban the box where they were giving felons work. And so they heard about my story and wanted to do it because my church, they, did a story on me, and just God set up all these different things to help
Yeah.
it to where. So anyway, I was at a chamber event and a young man I was talking to a guy and he was like, let's connect. So we went and had coffee, and he happened to be the speaker of the event. And so when we went to go, have coffee, he goes, "Why do you work so hard?" And I was like, "What do you mean? I need to be rich. I need to do all the things, right?" And he goes, "I don't believe you. What are you working so hard for?" And so I tell him, I was like, "Well, one day I plan to start this fatherhood organization that bop, 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 bop." So I lay out the whole thing. And he goes, "Well, why don't you just do that now?" And I was like, "Well, because I don't know anyone and you can't start a nonprofit out of nowhere." And they're like, "Sure you can." So he calls his wife from the other side of the coffee shop, says to her, "Hey, this is the thing. Da, 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 da. Tell her what you told me." And so I tell her, and she was like, "Okay, we can get started next weekend. When do what week you want to start?" And I was like, "Whoa, you can't just start a nonprofit out of nowhere." And they were
Yeah.
like, "Sure you can." And I was like, "No." So then a couple days later, I had a meeting that Friday with a guy. I tell him about these two crazy people, and I didn't even get to finish my story. And he was like, "Oh man, if you ever start that, let me know. I'll connect you to this person at DHS and this person that." I was like, "Hey, I don't know if you heard me, but you can't just start a nonprofit out of nowhere." And they said, "Sure you can." And I was like, "Oh God." So I was like, "Well, maybe I don't understand something." And then 2 days later, on February 29th, 2019, I was let go. My boss said, um, no, it was February of 2020. Yeah. February 2020, my boss said, "You put too many systems and processes in place. And I don't know that I would really need you anymore. You worked yourself out of a job."
Oh, wow.
I said, "Okay." And so she was like, "I don't understand what you're doing and how it's working." I was like, "I don't have control over your money. I just control people. That's all I do in your business." I said, "But, if you're firing me, that means God has something great for me." So I fasted. My mom, my sister, we all fasted for 3 days, and we wanted to know if I needed to actually start this business that he had put in my bosom, so to speak. And sure enough, I went to three other places that were in the dry cleaning business that had already expressed interest in wanting to hire me already. And so I tell them what's going on. And one is like, "Oh man, I see the value. I would hire you in an instant." He goes, "But honestly, man, if I could just tell you, I just feel in my spirit like you're supposed to do something else. He said, I would hire you in a heartbeat. And I said, but I just feel in my spirit, you're supposed to do something else. He didn't even know about the fatherhood thing. And so I was just like,
Wow.
dadgummit. I go see the guy that originally told me to do it. And I tell him, hey, I don't have a job anymore. Are you hiring? He was like, absolutely. He goes, but honestly, I think you need to do the thing. And so he's turns me on to this video called Jump from Steve Harvey. And he's talking to the Family Feud audience, talking about God put something special in every person. And if you don't jump off that cliff and learn to have faith, he'll never be able to carry you to the level at which you were supposed to go. He said, yeah, when you jump, that parachute ain't going to open right away. You're going to get some bruises, some scratches and scars. He said, but it will open. He said, your Bible at home, look in your Bible. It says that it must make room for you. And he said, if you really want to ever experience what living is like, do what God called you to do. And so I watched that probably like 8 times. And then finally was like, all right, we're going to go ahead and do it. And so I started it, and I went to work as the GM of a dental chain, and started doing both. And this thing just started taking off like wildfire. Like, like I was already, asked to be on a commission for the community commission for our syndicated newspaper, which is Tulsa World. So I was writing article. I was supposed to write 3 articles, never written anything in a newspaper ever. And so I did my first one over the boyfriend-girlfriend complex and how people not getting married, what long-term effects it's actually having versus what we pretend like they're not having. Because everyone thinks it's more advantageous to, just maintain this open relationship. But what it really does is it creates this performance-based situation where nobody can feel comfortable because everybody thinks at any given moment, this person could leave or that person can leave. And it creates so much stress and anxiety. And you make these lifelong partnerships by getting dogs, animals, houses, cars, payments, and all that stuff without the commitment side of marriage. And now, once you split, now it's, all kerfuffled, so to speak. And so I just talked about that. And then the rest of them were dealing directly with fatherhood. And so, they got connected to, our local radio station, who doesn't even read the paper. He doesn't like this particular paper and him are like devout enemies. And he read my article because somebody put it in his face, and he was like, oh yeah, I want to have this guy on my show. Yeah. So I was on the show, literally zero prep. They called and said, hey, this is Marquess. I was like, yep. I was like, all right, you'll be on in 5, 4, 3, bop. And I was live on the air.
Wow.
So I just went in and started talking and put me on hold when it was commercial break, came back live on the air, no talking in the middle. Yeah, it was interesting. And so those are the things that kept happening. Then I did a fatherhood summit and, planned on, we invited the governor for the first time. He was like, no, I can't make it. He's got all these things to do. Well, then last minute, literally the day before the summit, his people called and was like, hey, are you still doing that thing? And I was like, yeah. Is there any way the governor can still come? Because, he had this meeting with all these people and they all canceled for various reasons. And he's going to be in Tulsa anyway. We'd love for him to come. If he can come between 9 and 9:15, that'd be great. And I was like, he was actually scheduled for that time. So everybody else thought like this was planned. Oh my gosh, this guy has connections. When really it just was a fluke and God just made that happen.
And then you just did it again this year too. We've about a minute left, but you did it again this year, and it was successful this past week. And now, just real quick before we have to get cut off, you're a ministry. Your organization's amazing. We appreciate what your ministry. You reaching fathers. Tell us where they can find you. People can find your information. How they can stay connected to your organization.
BirthrightLivingLegacy.org or brlivinglegacy.org. You can find us on any social media site. Any of the platforms, our website. You can also just call at 918-922-9445. That is 918-922-9445.
Marquess, thanks for being on with us today. You've been a blessing to us.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much. It was an honor, Sean.
Hey, thanks for checking out this episode of Let's Talk About Fatherlessness. We want to now challenge you to take the next step by either starting a single mom community group in your church or with your ministry, or by joining our network of God is My Dad churches and ministries. Isn't it a great experience to be able to start a single mom community group?
Yeah, and it's just, if you talk to single moms, a lot of times what they'll tell you is the one thing they're lacking is that community, just a group that they can go in and they know there's no judgment. You know, everyone may not have the same situation. Everyone doesn't know what they're going through, but they can go in and they know there's no judgment. And it takes that kind of that restriction and that wall down for them so that they can share and then that they can grow in Christ.
And our single mom community groups are a wonderful ministry. And if your church can start one, we'd love to have you. We can help you get set up. We have the curriculum and all the resources you need. If you can't start one, we'd love to have you start by joining our network of churches and ministries, our God is My Dad network of churches and ministries, where you can get your church or your ministry on our map, and people can find you and find your ministry in your church so that they can get plugged into your church or ministry locally. So check that out. You can find all these resources at lifefactors.org. We have books, we have all kinds of content on there at lifefactors.org. Check it out today.